They walked straight into a storm of machine gun fire from German positions, barely affected by the artillery. The result was catastrophic. The Battle of the Somme was a horrifying demonstration of the scale of human loss that trench warfare could inflict. British and French forces sought to break through German lines after months of deadlock, hoping that an unprecedented artillery barrage of 1.5 million shells would obliterate the German defenses. But as British troops went over the top on July 1, 1916, they walked straight into a storm of machine gun fire from German positions, barely affected by the artillery. The result was catastrophic. Within hours, nearly 20,000 British soldiers lay dead, and another 40,000 were wounded, the worst single day in British military history. The fighting stretched on for 141 days, turning the fields of the Somme into a wasteland of mud, shattered trees, and trenches filled with stagnant water. Soldiers were often trapped in flooded foxholes, with rats and the stench of rotting bodies all around them. Despite minor territorial gains, the Allies and Central Powers found themselves in an unbreakable deadlock. By the time the offensive finally ended in November, over 1 million men had been killed or wounded, and the battlefield remained a chilling testament to the destructive futility of trench warfare. The Battle of Verdun was a grueling test of endurance, fought over a stretch of land so narrow that soldiers could often hear the whispers of the enemy in the distance. The German command, led by General Erich von Falkenhayn, aimed to force France into surrender by inflicting unbearable casualties on its army. The Germans launched their offensive on February 21, 1916, with a terrifying barrage that pulverized French defenses, filling the air with the acrid smoke of explosives and choking dust. For 10 months, the French defenders, led by General Philippe Pétain, held their ground under relentless assault, famously declaring, "They shall not pass." Verdun was a place of unimaginable suffering. Shells fell so constantly that entire villages were reduced to rubble, and the landscape transformed into a surreal wasteland of craters and shattered trees. Poison gas attacks seeped into the trenches, forcing soldiers to fight in choking, gas-filled masks. Each side fought for every inch, with men charging, falling, and often dying where they stood. The brutality left over 700,000 men dead or wounded by the time the battle finally ceased, and the name Verdun became synonymous with sacrifice and horror. To this day, the fields around Verdun are littered with fragments of weapons and bones, remnants of one of the most haunting battles of the war. The Brusilov Offensive, launched by the Russian Empire, was one of the most deadly and effective campaigns of World War I, marking a stark contrast to earlier, poorly organized Russian operations. Russian General Alexei Brusilov meticulously planned the attack, using an innovative approach of concentrated artillery strikes and surprise infantry tactics. On June 4, 1916, Russian forces unleashed a brutal assault on the Austro-Hungarian lines, shattering trenches with pinpointed artillery fire and launching waves of soldiers in tightly coordinated assaults. The precision and ferocity of the Russian attack caught the Austro-Hungarian forces completely off guard. Casualties were catastrophic. Austro-Hungarian and German troops were overwhelmed by the scale and organization of the Russian forces, and entire regiments were either killed, captured, or forced to retreat in disarray. The Austro-Hungarian lines crumbled, and their army never fully recovered from the losses. By the end of the offensive, the Central Powers had suffered nearly 2 million casualties, leaving the Eastern Front littered with the bodies of fallen soldiers and shattered military equipment. The Brusilov Offensive devastated the Austro-Hungarian army and nearly altered the course of the war, yet it came at a steep price. Russian casualties were also enormous, leaving soldiers and civilians alike exhausted and disillusioned with the endless bloodshed. The battles of the Somme, Verdun, and the Brusilov Offensive revealed the depths of devastation that modern warfare could bring, leaving indelible marks on both the land and the human soul. In these blood-soaked fields, entire villages vanished, and rolling hills were leveled into craters that still scar the landscapes today. Millions of young men, some only teenagers, marched bravely toward the front, many never to return, buried far from home in foreign soil. For those who survived, the horrors they witnessed lingered long after the war's end. Sights of comrades torn apart, sounds of artillery that shook the ground, and memories of endless nights spent in muddy trenches filled with fear and despair. These battles were not just clashes between armies, but harrowing ordeals that forever transformed nations and communities. The scale of loss rippled through families and towns, leaving generations marked by grief and remembrance. Memorials now, the landscapes of Verdun and the Somme, silent testaments to lives cut tragically short and dreams left unfulfilled. The legacy of these battles serves as a haunting reminder of what is lost when humanity turns to war. The men who fought and died here gave everything in the belief that their sacrifices would lead to a better world. But even as the guns fell silent, they left behind a poignant reminder, a plea, perhaps, to remember the cost of war and strive toward peace. Their stories, etched into history, urge us to reflect on the high price of conflict and to honor their memory by seeking a world where such brutal battles are no longer necessary.